Vice President for Strategy with Tomlinson, and we're happy to sponsor this session on leadership competencies to drive employee engagement. Probably one of the most important topics you could think about right now in terms of business. So I'd like to introduce our invited guests. And there's two separate groups I've now learned. There's TAP Strategy and HR Consulting, and the president is Bruce Weppert. And then also the TAP Institute, and the president is Terry Harrison. And so please engage us on all these good topics.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Adam. I'll pass the mic over to Bruce as well.
I'm just going to switch over to our main presentation.
So firstly, we know there's a keynote or a speaking address starting at 3 o'clock. We promised to get you out of here on time. So no worries about that. So as Adam explained, we are TAP. TAP has two sides of it. We have TAP Strategy and HR Consulting, and we have TAP Institute. I will pass the microphone. Yeah. Well, and we are Ottawa-based. We grew up in Ottawa, we like to say. We currently have 16 team members and growing. We work across the country. We work across borders. And this is our 18th year in business. Anybody who knows to get through the first year is hard, the second year as well. So we're happy to say we're in our 18th year. We serve all sectors that there are, and including construction. We are very busy with that, with this construction sector. And we have been a partner with OCA for over 9 years now, and we've designed and we teach some of their courses through their OCA or CST program, and which is their construction supervisor training program. And also we have been an affinity partner with OCA.
Fantastic.
I just wanted to say, I thought you could just say a little bit about TAP Strategy and HR Consulting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just to mention a little bit about the two organizations so you understand who we are and what we do. TAP Strategy and HR Consulting actually was born out of helping organizations upgrade their human resources. In other words, you know, if you're looking at, in your organization, employees who are not engaged, you're looking at opportunities to create new strategies in your organization. You are looking to basically create systems and tools and infrastructure that might not have existed, or you want to improve it. TAP Strategy and HR Consulting can do all of those things for you. There's a bit of a list on the side here on our little poster. And Terry, did you want to spend a moment to talk about TAP Institute?
TAP Institute came out from under TAP Strategy and HR Consulting. We were so busy doing team development and individual leadership and executive coaching, but we were doing it off the corners of our desk. So we decided that we needed to pull it out and highlight it and grow it. And so we pulled out TAP Institute. We do retreat planning, team development, and course design. Training, and so that's the part that I lead because I love anything to do with development. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So what are we here to do today? We're here to answer one question. How are some supervisors and leaders able to flourish while others struggle to lead and obtain results? That's really the question we're here to answer. Do you have that in your organizations? Do you see that? Where some people are doing fantastic and others are having real trouble to be successful. That's very common in a lot of organizations, and sometimes that's because we promote people who are really good at what they do, but as they move up through the ranks, it calls for different skill sets. And so sometimes we don't recognize what those skill sets are. So let's take a moment to look at what flourishing and what struggling might look like. So in the case of a struggling leader, you might be looking at elements like this. These are some of the signs. And I see a couple of smiling faces in the room going, yeah, I know this. Yes, it is the Eye of Mordor, in case for you nerds in the room who appreciate that. So you are looking at things like simple blaming others for their mistakes, micromanaging, dismissing ideas of others, communicating poorly. one thing that I find really interesting in here is inconsistent yet rigid in directing others. So they themselves are inconsistent in day-to-day in their decision-making and giving direction to others, but for them, they're very rigid on those stances that they do take. And another area that we'll talk a little bit later on is unaware of one's own performance gaps. That, I think, is a really critical element in terms of identifying those who are struggling within your organization. Those are just some examples of it. When you're looking at, conversely, those who are thriving leaders, you'll see some of the elements that, these are behaviors that you're looking at and saying, wow, this person's really doing well. You can probably identify a number of people in your organization that fit a lot of these descriptors. And so in here, you'll see key things like low employee turnover and providing feedback, guidance, and coaching to employees. Critical. You'll see that later on as we talk more about this. Influences and mobilizes others. One thing that I really like down here is building trust and commitment. I think is one that you'll see as a critical identifier of a successful, thriving leader. And again, topic we'll talk about a little bit later on and talk about how you can fix that is being self-aware of strengths and gaps and aware of the feelings and needs of others. So it's that self-awareness of themselves that, it's about being able to lead them or manage themselves helps to be able to manage others. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. Any questions about any of these? No? Okay. So it's not just, in our opinion and the things that we've learned through the work that we've done over the last 17 years. It's also through surveys that have been conducted. So this was a survey conducted by McLean & Company. 18,000 different people were involved in the survey. And in here, you'll see the correlation directly between a manager's ability to provide quality feedback and communications to their employees and that effect on employee engagement in the organization. And so you'll see, if you look at those employees who are deemed to be totally engaged, in the 70, 80, 90 percentile, they also agreed that their managers do these things. And some of the things that those managers do are, my manager provides me with high quality feedback. I clearly understand what is expected of me in my job. And my manager keeps me well informed about decisions that affect them. So those are some of the key elements that you're going to see theme throughout our conversation today is about how engaged and competent managers are in conducting their work as a supervisor. And you can see the effect that that has on having a workplace that's thriving and employees that are engaged. You'll also see, and this is kind of an interesting take on this, because employees are saying it's really important, and it's being identified as critical, but it's not what employees are experiencing. And the real gap is between what managers think they're doing well and what employees are saying, well, that's not the experience I'm having. And so that's a really important element to identify in your organization. And you can get that information through things like employee surveys, whether you're doing engagement surveys or other things of that nature, focus groups and such. You can gather that information to better understand it. But here's, for example, as a manager, right, I follow these best practices. My manager follows these best practices. So using feedback and coaching to improve performance and work methods, 58 versus 28%, that's half. And you'll see that all through these elements, separating task conversations for feedback and coaching conversations, listening and asking questions to learn more about your employees, assisting employees with career and skill development and providing frequent and quality feedback. In all cases, it's about half. The manager thinks they're doing it well, but that's not the experience the employee's having. So what does all this have an effect on your organization when you have a struggling leader or a successful leader? Let's look at the reasons that employees leave organizations? Because that's also a very critical element to consider, to say, why are people leaving my company? Right? Why are people leaving workplaces? Well, if you go ahead and look at the Indeed Career Guide, which is one of the biggest databases, you'll see in here, I'm unhappy with my manager was the #1 element. Unhappy with my manager. So you ever hear that old adage, you know, people leave their managers, they don't leave their companies, or they don't leave their job, they leave their supervisor. This speaks to that, right? Opportunities for growth, underpaid. You know, everybody says, no, pay is the most important reason why people leave organizations. Generally, that's not always true. It's what you hear about, but it's not the main reason why people leave. So you can see some other information. I won't go through every single list here, but when you look at Forbes magazine, same thing, but you'll see managers down along level 6. Now, of course, in Forbes, they're looking at larger organizations, much bigger organizations that might have a lot of professional suit-wearing kind of environments. That might not be exactly the experience that you have. In your organization, that might be much more hands-on, toolbox carrying, you know, kind of workplaces. But you have offices too. And then there's also business.com. Again, #2, you see the boss. Work schedules being too rigid, #1. And of course, LinkedIn, of course, we all know what LinkedIn is and how much data that they collect. LinkedIn, money, career development, work not challenging, their manager. So again, same thing you see in all of these elements, the manager fits within all of them. And it's not just that the manager is on this list, but when you look at the other elements that are on here, you actually are looking at, in the case of business.com as an example, all of those elements within business.com, those are within the control of the manager. So the manager not just is with a reason, but the manager is affecting the other reasons. So you can look at why it's so important to have competent leaders in your organization and those that are able to thrive. So coming back to this list, you can see on here a correlation between why people leave and the strengths and weaknesses that you might have in your management teams and your leadership teams. And these things here, if you go through them really carefully, they are behaviors. Okay, they're observable behaviors. They're identifiers. They're the signs that you can see. And these signs are directly attached to something called competencies.
Thank you. So the question is, what are competencies? How many people know really what competencies are? You do. Exactly. It's kind of this weird word, but it's really important for us as leaders to understand what competencies are. Competencies, in our opinion, are where the what meets the how. Oh. So competencies are behavioral and they're technical. Technical competencies are competencies that are the skills and the knowledge that you have to do something, and the behavioral are those observable behaviors that Bruce was talking about. And when done well, and you were mentioning values earlier, Adam, when done well, competencies can help you realize your values through core competencies. Anybody have core competencies with your organizations? You do. Wonderful. Excellent. These are typically tied to values. So competencies, the technical I talked about, the behavioral, these are again what one demonstrates. So there's things we know, and then there's the things that we have to do. But importantly is also what or how we do them. So for example, I know that driving down the country road has an 80-kilometer-per-hour speed limit. But if the police were to pull me over, which they haven't, by the way, because I've been really lucky, but it's because they would pull me over because of what I was demonstrating, not because I know the speed limit. It's similar in work. right? You can know things, but what are you doing? How are you showing things? So you can, you can go out and give estimates, but if you've put a bad taste in the client's mouth, they're not going to call you. So there's the what you did, but there's the how you did it. So this how are the observable behaviors and the competencies that we're talking about. And it also shows here from Harvard that 85% of job success comes from those softer, more challenging competencies. So that's how important the how is. And as I always say, competencies are the ticket to admission and the ticket to stay in an organization. When you have your core competencies, they help you to learn how to hire somebody. You're hiring somebody for the competencies that you want to see in them. You can teach them technical things. And I'm not talking if they need their red seal and, but they can learn that, but it's harder to learn the softer things. And that's what you want to hire for most of the time, is those competencies, and you want to know what they are. And then once you have them defined, you can then hold people accountable for them, and that's why you get to talk about how they work. So you have this list now. It's not just what has been defined and whether you did it or not, you get to talk about how they did it and if it was successful or not. So this becomes much more powerful. So then this brings us to, which leadership competencies? So we've been talking competencies, and what this does is this brings together the need and the power of competencies. Now we can talk competencies for any role. There's important competencies for all roles. But here we're talking specifically leadership competencies, and there are some set identified best practice leadership competencies that exist, but very specifically your organization may need very particular, let's say negotiation. We can see negotiation up here, right? Negotiation. That can be necessary or networking in your organization. But there are some others that we see up here, for instance, where embracing diversity. We like the idea of embracing diversity. It's very important, but it's not as easy to do as seeing it on the page, is it? We also see ensuring accountability. One of my favorite ones too, because when we can demonstrate accountability as leaders, we can follow up and follow through, but importantly, we can instill this in others. So that is also a leadership competency. But we have to be able to do it in order to be able to instill it, right? Kind of what Bruce was saying before, right? You have to be able to follow through yourself first, which is closely tied to fostering independence, holding people accountable. So there's a whole host of leadership competencies that can be determined, but what you can do is find out what your competencies are so that you can make them live and breathe and have power within your organization so that they can make your culture grow. So that you can therefore know how to have the right types of performance discussions when you need to as well on the right topics. So when we're looking back at these lists, these are all observable behaviors in many respects. They're signs that competencies are perhaps needed, and sometimes there's other factors. We know this. Hiring right now, it's not a picnic, is it? No. But when people are constantly leaving in one team, there might be something to look at with your leadership competencies. So when we're talking about why are some thriving and others not, and it's harder for us to ask ourselves, am I struggling somewhere? Do I need some help to learn some of these competencies? And maybe some assessment or coaching is needed in order to find that out. But having that awareness helps, that Bruce was speaking about, right? Leadership competencies are closely tied to emotional intelligence competencies or emotional quotient. The 4 essential fundamentals of emotional intelligence, or EQ, include a person's potential for self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and their ability to manage relationships. This is by Daniel Goleman from Working with Emotional Intelligence. Not only is there a link, they are included. So leadership competencies include emotional intelligence competencies. If you have a leader that is missing some of the emotional intelligence, you know it. You see it. So let's get into that a little bit. Self-awareness, knowing one's internal states, motivations, preferences, resources, and intuitions. This is important, and you can see this consistency from people and leadership as they're demonstrating their own self-awareness. And the more self-aware we are, the more consistent our behaviors are. Is this true, what I'm saying? Yes? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing some. Check out this next one, self-management. Anybody have a boss that used to go, whew? Yeah, it's not helpful. And in fact, maybe we leave because of things like that. The ability to regulate one's own behaviors, thoughts, and emotions in a productive way. Taking responsibility for one's own behaviors and well-being and mistakes. And, who cares we make a mistake? I mean, we care, sometimes they're very important, but if we don't learn to own up to them, we never are being accountable. We're never taking responsibility. And to regulate one's own behavior means that we have the ability to think and use judgment at all times. Social awareness, awareness of others' feelings, needs, concerns, and a adeptness at inducing desirable responses in others. Leadership. And relational leadership. Ability to understand and to develop, use, manage, and nurture positive connections with others. Your team, other teams, other leaders. So this isn't rocket science, but it shows, now we're talking about emotional intelligence, and these competencies are paramount in my opinion. And the output of these emotional intelligence competencies is everything we were talking about. All of that list of the black list and the white list, the two sides of it, right? You had the eyesore on one side, and then the positives. So we have emotional intelligence in leaders has been shown to demonstrate all of these factors. So increased team performance, lower attrition rates included, which is very nice. Any questions on these? I want to make sure I've made the link. So we've got these competencies out there, and if you can define them and determine what they are, you can then blend them into all of your work. And I'm going to pass that over to Bruce because you're going to talk about that. Right. And but once they're identified, you can have those conversations, right? But more importantly, you can hire for them. Yes. Yes, I agree completely. And the answer, as always, is it depends, right? It depends on what you're given back. You have to walk that line at all times. So if somebody is, if their performance, there's other lines we can make too. So for example, if their performance is suffering, you can talk about the performance. If then they bring in why they're struggling because it has to do with wellness, you can have that discussion to say, have you gone to see somebody about it? So what you're trying to do is not be judge and jury. You're trying to show caring, but you also have to, you can talk about their performance no matter what. That you get to do that. But it is always a line. It's nice to get to know people. How are your kids, or how's your partner, and whatever it is. But if they say, yeah, I have a specialist doctor's appointment that I'm going to next week, just say, okay, were you able to take the time off? You don't need to ask too much more, right? So you need to protect yourself, but you need to always use your judgment, and that comes to more competencies, is the judgment to know where you stop asking and where you start, but you can exude empathy at the same time. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. You're right, and the gray area is the part that's the problem, right? Because you can have somebody who, let's say they're off of work more often than they should be. Then we can have the conversations as to, look, I'm getting concerned, you're running out of sick time. There comes a point at which when something becomes a problem, you have more options. But it's in the interim, you have to use your judgment and your humanity. I think it's wonderful to be human and have great relationships. But you have to know when you're inviting enablement and you're overstepping. And that's always the challenge, and there's no possible way to answer that unless we talk specifics. And you can always call us for those specifics. We have a helpline, and we call it the bat phone, and it rings a lot. And so we talk through these scenarios. And of course, we have coaches as well, but I don't want to do too much of that stuff. Any other questions? Thank you for that. Anything else? No? Okay. Yes?
So just as somebody who's an employee that's seeing a lot of different managers and whatnot, as an employee, I kind of appreciate when management is just kind to me. There's so many people underneath them, just the fact that a leader shows that, hey, they care about me a little bit, it just means a lot to me.
Yeah.
And it's why I'm going to stick around with the same company.
Yeah.
It just means a lot when leadership actually cares about you a little bit.
100%.
So many of us. When you care, it means a lot.
Yes, absolutely. And you can exude this, and you really can care. It's ideally, it's not fake. You really do care, right? And people stay when they feel valued. So that ability to feel valued is this very complex web. It's not so complex. When they know they get the right feedback, they know you care. It's the occasional, hey, how are you doing? It's not all business all the time, right? So it's how you do it. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? I appreciate your questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Terry. Good questions, absolutely. One of the items that you had mentioned related to a supervisor showing interest in you. If you recall on the list of those items that were a thriving manager, one of the items at the bottom of that list was actually somebody who shows personal interest in you and your career. So that's, again, just reinforcing the fact that, yes, making that connection where employees feel like they belong, feel like they're in the right place to work, because I'm not just here to, build a foundation or to build a structure or dig a hole or whatever the case may be. You actually think of me as an individual, and that individual has needs. And so it doesn't take a lot just to have those conversations. It doesn't take a lot to spend that time. I used to work for a large tech company, and they had a few thousand employees here in Ottawa, and I was their director of human resources. And one of the rules throughout that organization is that every week you spoke for a half an hour with your direct reports, and that conversation would have nothing to do with any job function, any activities or tasks or responsibilities that they had. The conversation was around, how do you like working here, and how can I make it a better experience for you? That was the 30 minutes. And then with your non-direct reports, your reports one level down, you tried to meet with them once a month and have a similar type of conversation. But you would not believe how that made people feel. They actually felt identified as, wow, you care about me. I work here and you see me. So You know, that's a critical thing. And for me, that was a huge takeaway in my career because I'd never worked for an organization where that was our standard. And I got to tell you, I loved it when my boss did it with me, because nowhere in my entire 35 years of my career did anybody ask me those questions. And so it made me feel real good. So you can imagine how that makes others feel. And
Bruce,
if-
can I just jump in with something
Yes.
too? I just wanted to say too that ability, is this working okay?
Yes.
The ability for your employees to feel valued is complex too. You can't be working at 100% speed at all times, and that they can't even afford to take a day off to see their doctor, or they can't afford to, right? So you need to have those built-in succession thinking. You need to have the team, and when you need the all hands on deck times, everybody's they're ready to be all hands on deck. But if they need to take, we have an employee who needs flexible work hours. There's no reason why we can't give that person flexible work hours, so we do, and she feels valued. So, but and we know a little bit as to why, but we're very careful not to overstep in how we do it. But anyway, just wanted to throw that out.
Great, thank you. And so when you look at this list here, connected to the emotional intelligence elements that Terry was talking about, you see the outcomes of that. If you look at each one of these items, they were on the list of why employees leave. That's the connection right there. So if you spend the time focusing on developing these things and developing an employee's emotional intelligence and some of the other competencies that we had, I think it was on this list here, and if you spend the time developing these things and nurturing them, then the outcomes are associated with less turnover, happier employees, more productivity. Those are all of the benefits of doing this. So I'm just going to jump ahead here to how do you make this all come to life? And I've kind of touched a little bit on that now. But part of this is through what's called the employee life cycle. Has anybody ever heard of this? Okay. Yeah, so an employee life cycle is basically what are all the elements, especially from a human resources side, but it's connected to managerial. It's not an HR thing. HR is just there to enable you. This belongs to you as a supervisor. But you look at things like HR planning and infrastructure, talent acquisition, onboarding, development, succession, performance management, engagement, and then transition. And HR is broken down into 3 levels: the strategic side of HR, the relational side of HR, and then the transactional side of HR, right? So strategic being, where are we going? What is our workplace need for the next 5 years, and how do we get there? What do our employees need for the next 5 years, and how do we help them? The relational side of it is, further on looking at engagement and looking at employee motivations and all the other things that we've been talking about here in terms of developing competencies and strength. And the transactional is, scheduling vacations and carrying out the day-to-day responsibilities. But this is what we call the employee life cycle. And so how do competencies fit into that? You need to make sure that your competencies are considered when you are hiring people. So what are the desired competencies you want in your organization for that organization and for your people to be successful? What does that look like? And are you out there hiring for that? I was actually working with a, try not to give away the organization's names, working with a large mill that produced wood, flooring, wood products. And in that organization, he was looking to go out and hire a sales manager. And so we were helping him through that process. And so I said, let me see a copy of your questions you're going to be asking during your interview. And so he sent me the questions he was going to ask. Guess what? They were all based on technical. And so when you go back to look at that list we were talking about earlier, when you saw the kind of the pyramid, and 15% of success was technical, and 85% was behavioral. So he was spending all his time trying to understand this individuals or the candidates that he was looking at, look at their technical abilities, but not looking at whether this person was actually going to be a good leader, where they're going to nurture their people, where they're going to come in and be a good team player, where they're going to be helping to build that organization's culture and help it thrive. So we started helping him ask the right questions to build on the competencies that he was looking for, the behavioral competencies. And 3 of the 5 people that he was considering as his winners, he wrote them off. And he said, I would actually, they were 2 of them were my top 2 people. And he said, once I started asking the right questions, I realized, wow, these people would not be good for my team. But they were stars on paper. So that's why it's really important, because once they're in, they're in. And you can create a lot of damage by hiring the wrong people, especially if you're hiring a leader. And the same thing applies for when you promote people. Because a good plumber does not make a good manager of plumbers. It's an entirely different skill set. So it's really important to think of that when you're doing your hiring. So that's where you hire it, and then you develop it. So competencies should be part of your training programs. It should be part of your onboarding. You cultivate it through your culture. Do you support it? Do you talk about it? And then do you reward it? Because rewarding it is what's going to help your employees realize, wow, this is important. I get rewarded when I do these things. It doesn't always have to be financial. It could be, for example, hey, I notice you're really good at collaboration and leading teams. I have a couple of really great projects I'd like you to work on the side. These projects are going to be fantastic for developing these other competencies and skill sets for you, and also our competencies and skills needed for other positions in our organization. So it gives you an opportunity to grow further professionally. Wow, what a great message to send to people. So that's where the reward side of this comes in. As Terry said earlier, it's the ticket to admission. Right? It's a ticket to admission. You have to fulfill these competencies, or at least demonstrate them through the interviewing process, in order for them to come and join your organization. It's the roadmap for upward movement, like we just talked about. Right? How do you help people be successful in that next job? Has anybody here ever heard of the Peter Principle? No? It's probably goes back about, probably dating myself here a little bit, but it goes back about 20, 25 years ago. And the concept was you get promoted into your level of incompetence. So again, that concept of I'm a really good plumber and I'm really, really good at getting work done. So you're so good at it, we're going to promote you to the manager of plumbers. And guess what? Entirely different skill set. The person's not a leader. They don't know how to lead teams. They don't know how to give feedback. They're not great communicators. And all of a sudden now, your best employee became one of your biggest problems. And that's because you didn't take the time to identify what competencies were needed at that next level for that ticket to entry to that job, and to stay and be successful in that job. And guess what happened? Your best person working for you is either going to leave on their own, or you're going to demote them, or you're going to have problems with them, and you're going to ask them to leave. Look what you've done to your own organization. So this is where competencies come in, and why they're so, so very critical to success. And it sits at every level of the entire employee life cycle. And as we said, it's your ticket to stay. Any questions about this? Yes?
Some of the challenges I find are with the employees that are not on board, the weaker ones. So how do you engage employees
Well, you know, when you look at performance management in an organization, there are three key elements to it, right? One of them is about the job that they do, the what. The other part of it is the how they do their job. That's your competencies. And the third part of it is setting goals for oneself, for whether it be learning a new task, strengthening a deficiency or a gap in performance, preparing themselves for another role. And to be able to bring that person to the table, that needs to be part of your culture, to talk about these things. Employees need to know that they exist and that that's expected of them. And so if you're going to have a conversation with an employee, the employee needs to know that this is part of the conversation and this is what I expect. But if you've never talked about competencies before, you've never brought it to the table, they don't know what they are, it's unfair to hold them to a standard they weren't hired for or you never developed them for. So in short, to answer your question, if it's not part of your culture, then you need to introduce it as part of your culture before you're going to sit down and start having hard conversations with people about it. Doesn't mean that you still can't talk about expectations. And hey, I noticed the other day in a meeting that you were really short with other members of the team. You didn't show like you were being collaborative and you were supporting other people's work. Those are things I expect from you, right? Now, if you have a set of competencies, you can tie that back to that or even tie it back to values of your organization. Say one of your values are treating people with respect, right? And the behaviors I saw you exhibit in that meeting were inconsistent with our values. And this is a competency I want you to develop. So how can I support you? Let's talk about that. If the person says, I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't want to be part of this conversation, then you got a big problem. Did that answer your question? Thank you, good question.
I just want to jump in just to say that, yeah, you have to roll out your competencies with everybody. You have to let everybody know these are our competencies and they're important to us, and have conversations with people. Do you have any challenge with this? Where do you see yourself in this list of competencies? So you start engaging. That's the beginning, early on side of rolling this out. But then, you know, best performance management is on time. As soon as you see it, you don't wait until the end of the year. Gosh, don't do that. But it's every day, all the time. And you can ask questions, and if they're really resistant, you can say, look, this is an expectation. This is important, and here are some areas that I'm seeing. And if they don't seem interested, then I'd say, listen, I'm telling you this is important, and if it gets so serious, I am not above, well, I've been known to say, you know, it becomes like a performance improvement plan. We really need to see these behaviors being demonstrated if it's very severe. And you got to know your job may be in jeopardy. And you have to exude you want their success so that they are successful. And how can I help you with this? And you can make up a plan. So it depends on where you are in this rolling out aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely, and I'll come to your question in just a second. But and to think your employees, you know, might be hourly employees. You know, they're doing very manual labor. You might think, oh, they're not kind of buy into all of this, right? We just designed for a client. They have 2,000 technical trades. 2,000 employees in technical trade jobs, everything from mechanics to heavy equipment operators to carpenters to painters. They have a whole range of them, 2,000 employees, electricians. And so when we rolled out competencies with them, we put in place not just the technical competencies that they need for their job to be successful, but we also rolled out all of the soft skills, those behavioral associated elements, and actually put defined expected behaviors associated with each competency. I can tell you that when we rolled this out, we were expecting a backlash because we weren't quite sure if we were venturing into the right zone with the right people, but we thought, this needs to be done because this organization, they do great things, but their work culture was really suffering because employees and their supervisors didn't have the sufficient competencies. And so, believe it or not, we rolled this out and it has been extremely successful. It's been integrated into all of their hiring processes, all of their development processes, their apprenticeship programs, their Red Seal training and Journey Person training programs. It's been integrated into all of them. And employees are actually talking about this stuff now. Sure, there's probably 20% who are, you know, what are you talking about this BS? This isn't for me, right? But when you look at, okay, that's your 20% fringe that you're gonna have to manage. But the other 80% were all on board. So, and that's 2,000 people across the country. And we worked with other large construction organizations, and every employee had to have a competency that was associated with leadership. It didn't matter what their position was, they had to exude a leadership competency. That's pretty amazing.
The thinking is that leadership starts with self. And so we each have to exude it. So it's expected, no matter where you are in an organization, you demonstrate leadership. And what does that look like? Accountability, et cetera, right? So that's how they're connected.
Yes. So, sir, you had a question.
Yeah, you sort of were touching on it. And some of the stuff, I think, where some of the confusion comes in with leadership and management, what to do, is that, you know, maybe in the past things were a little harsher, a little more, you know, do your job or you're going to be fired type of thing, and then the pendulum starts to swing. But at the end of the day, like, you must see some managers where they're almost too accommodating or too nice, and then, but because there's a certain class of employee that are like, sometimes they need not a rap, but you know, little ruler in their hands, or whatever you want to call it. But there's the escalation of that type of like, okay, we're serious now. Like, we're okay, we can be friends, but at the end of the day here, you know, and sort of that pendulum has to almost come back to saying like a leadership, it's understanding, but it's also at the end of the day, like, do your job. And that sort of that harshness
Absolutely.
is starting to maybe come back into it, but in the past you've sort of like, be a better person. If you are so nice to your employees, they'll be great to you, which is true, but there's also the other scale that some employees need that sergeant major reaction or that more military precision to accept what they're doing type of thing.
And I would say that sometimes they just need that bolstering of, this is the line, and you've reached it. I have a true example that I will share this week. I don't know if I shared this with you, Bruce, but I have a client that had a problem because the team has a hybrid work environment, and one of the employees prefers to use Google Online, Google Sheets, Google instead of the Microsoft. So the employee has decided to only use the Google suite of tools, contrary to everything else that the organization uses, and they are enabling it. And I think, and I said, similarly, is that working for you? No. I said, do you want it to continue? No. I said, then don't let it continue. Well, how do I do that? You say, you need to switch over to the others, and if you need some training, we'll give you some time. Let us know what you need to learn in order to, but there's an example of, wow, that's really extreme, right? To let people use their own platforms that they choose versus the company platforms. It's a little strange, but there is that nice, and people will take advantage sometimes. There's a certain amount that always will, and you need to draw the line, and then you need to draw it, reinforce it, and then sometimes it turns into more difficult conversations. Absolutely.
Yes, you know, absolutely. And again, it comes back to, you didn't see on the list of competencies, you didn't see likability on the list, because employees don't need to like their supervisor, but they need to respect them. So what do you need to do to create respect on your team? And I think that it's great if they like them. That's an extra bonus, but it's not an absolute. And with every one of the competencies that you saw listed here, or during our conversation we talked about, there are associated observable behaviors that come along with that. And so being able to give direction and hold other people accountable, part of that is knowing when to say no, knowing when to turn from, okay, I hear you and I love your ideas, but I need to direct you now. Move from coaching or harvesting of ideas to giving you direction, right? I'd like you to start doing this way.
And
Thank
these
you
are
for
all
your idea.
competencies.
Yep.
Everything. If it's
Yeah.
tough, we're probably talking about a competency.
It's funny, a book I read many years ago, and it's probably so old you won't even find it in many places, but it's called The 1 Minute Manager. I don't know if anybody ever heard of that. It's, it's a quick read, whatever, but I gotta tell you, the lessons that I pulled from that book in my early days of management were so helpful to me, because they did talk about the yes, continue this, or yes, start this, yes, continue that, and no, stop doing that. Plain and simple direction for a manager to base themselves off of. Okay, yes, so we're just walking out of time now. So any more questions that you have about the making it come to life? It's all in your hands. If you're the leader of an organization, you are the one who can be driving this. If you're not the top leader in the organization and you're sitting here, this is something for you to bring back to your organization and say, we need to start talking about this.
And let me give you an example too. You can have your leadership competencies that we were showing you, but with your core competencies, which would be tied to your values, let's say one of them is accountability, because it should be, in my opinion, something like that. But in there, you'd have a whole bunch of bullets to describe what we mean by accountability in this organization. Follows up, follows through, does what one says is going to do, right? Things like that. You can have a list of them.
Takes ownership.
Team,
Yep.
yeah, team excellence. What does it mean? Client service. What does client service mean to us in our organization? And then you can have some for everybody, but guess what? The leaders of people have more, because not only do they have to have those competencies, but they need to foster those competencies in the others and hold them accountable for them too. So there's another set of competencies. Does anybody have competencies identified in your organization? But yeah, I see. Yeah, wonderful, excellent. Thank you.
Great. All right, so we'll continue to open up the floor. I know we're about to wrap up, so we've got about 5 minutes so we can ask some questions or answer some questions. Yes?
I know the story you're describing about the plumber that's the best plumber, and then he gets put into a management position. And so he has all of the technical skills. They're all there. They are familiar with the company, but they're lacking in some of the behavioral.
Yes.
That's something like that you've seen maybe like, can those things also be kind of taught as the same as the technical? Because if they're really valuable to the company, but we really want to bring them up, knowing that there's some of the behavioral competencies aren't all there yet,
Yes.
but really wanting to put them in that position.
So yes, and there you go from the simplistic side of developing it and teaching it to the more complex. The simplistic side being to say, okay, here's what here's what my expectations are, and as Terry was just describing, what are all the behaviors? What does that look like? Right? What are the things you do day to day that we can observe that demonstrate that you're actually living this competency? You're making it come to life in your role. Sometimes people will take that and go, got it, okay, I didn't know that, right? Yeah, clear criteria that say this is what this is all about. But then you might have others who go, I don't quite know what to do with that. I've never done this before, and I see these things in writing, but I'm not sure how to make them come to life. It's really uncomfortable for me. Well, that's where potentially training is available to them, or coaching.
Yeah, I was going to say leadership, competency development, coaching. There's coaching that specifically is for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and whether that be through a formal means or whether through sending them to a course or hiring, a coach or even a trainer, or not to plug our own
Mentor-
company,
mentorship-
companies like ours, we go in and help develop those types of systems within an organization to make it come to life from end to end.
And sometimes you have a leader who's really great at some of these competencies, and maybe you can have mentorship within your organization for that. But if not, you can find, yeah. And if you don't know what leadership competencies you're looking for, there are some basic ones to start with, and then you can figure it out as you go as well. But for instance, our coaches under TAP Institute, they are all ICF, International Coach Federation certified. It is the gold star globally for coaching, and they're taught to do that, to work with an individual at their pace. And it's a very confidential discussion, so that if you yourself feel, I don't know where I'm at, maybe I'm great, maybe I'm not, but I need some help. Who here would like to admit that they have coaches or have experienced coaching before? Yeah, okay, wonderful. And
Great.
And it's been helpful? Yeah, okay, wonderful.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so that can help with that.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Well, fantastic. And, just in terms of us closing off, I know you have a couple of words you'd like to say. But in terms of anybody, if you would like a copy of today's presentation, then just, take a snapshot with your camera of our contact information.
Oh, and there's cards, there's business cards.
And there's
back
business cards at the back of the room. Please take one. Just get in touch with us. We will not spam you, anything like that. But if you'd like to get a copy of it, just send us a note and say, I'd love a copy of the presentation, and we'll send it off to you as well. And for those of you who might not have left your business card yet, at the back, we have a draw, in case you didn't hear it earlier, a draw for 3 hours of consulting services valued at over $500. That we would give to you or to your organization. We'll do that draw. Actually, we'll probably can do the draw before we leave.
Yes.
Yes.
People will have to put their cards in.
Yeah, we'll have to put their cards in. Okay, so
No,
we'll do the draw and get in touch with you.
We'll do the draw by the end of the day. Let's manage this
Yeah,
for us.
yeah.
We'll get in touch with the
I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, fantastic, great. Well, from both of us, thank you very much for your time here today.
Yeah, and so on behalf of Tomlinson and the OCA, and also John Bruley, who provided some gifts, I got some gifts right here. I'd just like to say thank you so much for doing an excellent conversation on leadership competencies that will help us and our businesses as we kind of drive forward. So thank you so much. It's very good.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you to Tomlinson as well, too, for sponsoring today's event. This is fantastic.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.